All right, welcome back to Pagitt Radio. We're broadcasting live out of the Twin Cities, around the world, and as we're quite convinced, even on the space station. We're going to talk with our friend Troy Bronsink. Troy has written a book called Drawn In, the creative process for artists, activists,
It's a good book
and Jesus followers.
for anybody.
Yeah. So I'm hoping we get Troy on the line here in a second. Hey, Troy.
Hi, Troy.
Did we lose him? I think we did. Sometimes I see this happening on NPR, or I
Yes.
hear this happening on NPR, and it makes me feel better.
Yeah, it's
What's going on, y'all?
Hey, Troy Bronsink. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hi,
Good to be on
Troy.
the show.
Troy, congratulations on the book, and congratulations on landing that fantastic forward.
I don't know how I got that guy.
I don't know, forward by Doug Pagitt. No, this is a terrific book, Drawn In, a creative process for artists, activists, and Jesus followers. Not to be confused, as one might look on the cover, as Darwin.
Yeah, it's
For
kind of,
people who are
the type
slightly
of-
dyslexic.
Yeah, I
tell you,
did.
all the hits I get on Darwin is just awesome, man.
Yeah, I did that a couple of times. Saw that there was Drawn In, and if you just if you got a little dyslexia rolling, you could flip those around. All right, Troy. Victoria's read the book. I've obviously read the book. You're trying to make an invitation to people to engage in a creative process. And one of the things I think is great about the book, and I'd like to hear your comments on this, is that you want people to think that to understand this is not just for artists, but that a creative process itself is something that many people can utilize. You're an artist and you're a musician and so on, but you're trying to say, hey, this is something more expansive and for more people than just those who would see themselves in the category of being an artist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you in the past 10 years, there's just been such a widening awareness of everybody's creative life. And you've got DIY folks where somebody's just thinking differently about how they're going to cook, what they're going to do to fix their sink, that kind of stuff. But and also like in design sciences, so like David Kelly and IDEO and Stanford D School, all these places are saying that when we make things and we think about the process, the outcome is different. So I do think that everybody makes something, and in fact, like the physical things we make with our life, we can enter that with intention, or we can just accidentally just kind of be in patterns of reaction, or just kind of stay in a rut. So this is an invitation, to be more intentional about the life we make.
And you're trying to say that for artists and activists, and as a subtitle says, Jesus followers on the whole, but you're also trying to say, look, not every artist knows the right and best way to engage as in the creative process. Like, just because someone sees themselves as an artist or a musician or something, the creative process is a difficult thing for anyone to wrap their minds around.
Yeah, I mean, and even the sense that there is a creative process or the creative process, like, working on a subtitle for a book, it was tempting to call it the creative process, right? And it's like, well, there's no way to sum up the creative process. But when you look at a lot of different ways people move through an inventive age, if you will, move through brainstorming and listening to different things and focusing in, and then the strategic way that you go through prototypes, and then you have outcomes and go, what do I do with these outcomes? And Richard Rohr calls it the sacred no, that space where you decide what things you are going to keep and what things you're going to put to the side. All that kind of work is important to a creative, to an activist. I just think in general, to someone who's a Jesus follower living life intentionally. Some artists, though, and churches for that matter, we kind of stall out at different stages in this process. And that's where creative process thinking can be so helpful. You can kind of go, oh, you know what? I'm a lot more excited about taking risks than I am about listening to how these outcomes are affecting other artists and other work, or how our church's outcomes are affecting our neighbors. And so that question of the listening parts and the what you normally call just the productive parts, you put them in kind of conversation with each other and think, how am I going through these cycles?
I really appreciated what you had to say about navigating having an outcome versus just delving into the work. you want to say a little bit about that? Like some people get so caught up in the vision of something, and some people get really caught up in the work part, and that those two things need to be there's a synergy between those two things. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, you guys, this kind of links with what you guys have been talking about from Mark the previous half hour, but I'm not going to step in any potholes here. But it is interesting that the notion of our physical materiality and the notion of our imagined identity, both our future and our past, those things aren't at odds with one another. In fact, if anything, the stories of Jesus and then the theology that's told of Jesus, some of it since talks about the integration of those two things. So when somebody is picking up a new medium for their artwork, maybe I tell a story of our friend. You guys know Holly and Ryan Sharp. Holly had moved over to encaustics where she was working with the wax. And in that interaction with the wax, it was a new experience. And that new experience with that material began to help her make some sense of her new experience as a mom of 2 kids and her new experience of the place they lived in Oregon. And I think that we miss that a lot of times in life, that when we're put into a new context, the context isn't the enemy of the ideal. It's the place where our ideal gets, I guess, fleshed out in a more holistic, integrative way. So the material isn't the only. I mean, I don't know. I don't get that deep into to making the theological differentiation, but I don't think the material is the only thing that's there. But without the material, we don't know what else is here. It's in these bodies that we encounter God and one another, and so living into that is important. So that what you were saying, Victoria, the work and the vision. A lot of times we get really passionate about visionaries and folks that can cast this great vision, and that gift of woo, right? And we think, well, that's the person that's called to lead, and I should just go follow and be a worker bee kind of thing.
I like that idea a lot. Say more about that, Troy. That sounds fantastic.
At a certain
and you could help.
Right? Help the people with the real ideas.
What's wrong with that?
At a certain point, that separation of vision and work, that separation of the product and the making, it takes away agency. It gets us out of the game and puts us in this responsive place where we're left with either, I hope God will tell me because I don't know how to discern God, or we're left in kind of a reactionary pattern of like, well, I sure as heck I'm going to do that because that leads this way. So you're not really aware of how your work jives with your vision. So that creative process, right? You begin with those dreams, but then you begin to go, how do those dreams play out in reality? And that is as much a part of the brainstorming and the work of faith as any.
And Troy, I think there's another aspect to this, and I think the playful title gets at this, that one is not being driven in a creative process. You want to ask someone to consider being pulled into or drawn into it, and even in their own spirituality or their own life, to feel drawn in by God or by Spirit or by others into what they're doing, and not have a metaphor of being driven to complete something.
Well, yeah, and the hard part for this, and I know this myself as a writer and musician, and the activist work we were doing in inner city Atlanta, you can get you get pulled in, you're drawn in, and then at a certain point, your whole identity is wrapped up in that ideal. My friend Barb Smucker says it's like an ocean has flooded into your room, and if you leave it, it'll go away. So you have to solve it all right now. And so a lot of us creatives, folks that are really passionate about social work in our immediate neighborhoods, about justice, we get so identified with the ideal that we're not differentiated in a way where we can listen for the rhythms. Peterson calls it when he plays with that Matthew 11 passage about my yoke is light that Jesus says. He plays with it and calls it the unforced rhythms of grace. That there's actually like a flywheel effect where you can kind of rest in the fact that as the vessel that I am, I can bring this kind of work to this project today. And then I can go to bed tonight and I'm not the sole holder of this project. There's a community of folks holding it. There's the universe and God's spirit and those creative parts of the world are also pulling it. And so I want to be less obsessed about whether I'm getting my way and more aware, attuned to how is this supposed to happen? Like a potter that'll work with clay will begin to go like, oh, the vessel's going to go this direction. I might want it to have been this, but I've got to listen to where when it's on the wheel here, it's going to go this direction. And if you can open up to that, the beautiful things begin to emerge.
And what makes that hard for some people in their situations is that their life circumstance, or like in your case, you're a worship minister and do other things at a Presbyterian church in Cincinnati. Like there's a schedule requirement, right? Like next Sunday at this time, we're going to sing songs, and it would be good if you made one that we could sing there. Or a pastor has a sermon that's like, it's going to be delivered at that time. Or a parent has a child that's like, well, the kid's going to get up in the morning, and I have to now, I can't wait around for sort of the delivery of the, of the creative process to reveal itself. I got stuff I got to do, and it has to hit a time frame. So we end up spending a different kind of energy, it seems, on trying to not only have a creative process, but there's an urgency that sometimes is legitimate and sometimes, is perhaps a bit forced. That seems to interfere with that.
Yeah, it was a couple of weeks ago, and this isn't a new concept, but he said it so well. My friend Dave Nixon here in Cincinnati, we were at something, and he said, I'll just say it, and then we can unpack it a little bit. But his language was, God wants to be with you in the life you have right now, not like after, in the life that you wish you'd have if you could get these various things in order. And I think that's another way of saying this, right? That you're often we unplug from a vision, or a dream, or whatever that the right word there is, because it's too overwhelming. I mean, especially now we have access to so many overwhelming projects. And so that's just as dangerous as being obsessed by making that one project happen, or my life won't matter. It's right now in this conversation. Are we aware? Are we attentive? Are my cells changing according to things that I'm good with?
Yeah, it can become exhausting, though, can't it? I mean, the creative process is an exhausting one, right? What is it about that? And you even write about this process, and you use this imagery of the creation narratives from Genesis, and you have these 6 waves: God dreams, and then God hovers, God risks, God listens, God reintegrates, and then God rests. So I think it's really beautiful imagery that has seemed to connect to the human experience for a long time. This
Absolutely.
idea of dreaming and hovering and risking and listening and reintegrating and then resting as the process. And sometimes I think people feel like that resting piece is the least legitimate, right? Like that's the one that if you get tired or if you're beaten, then people tend to not want to reward that with like, well, that means you did a good day's work. Instead it gets this other kind of narrative, like, well, you're not going to have the energy for this, or are you doing okay, or how come you're so worn out? But that is an interesting thing, isn't it, to have in the ancient Hebrew narratives, to have God resting, right? So that like the creative process should generate the need for rest.
Right. And it's so funny because, for those, I grew up in church. And so, so you've got all these layers of times where Sabbath or Sunday worship is kind of co-opted as
the day of rest.
The day of rest. Right. Yeah, exactly. And then I became a pastor, and my wife's like, yeah, Sunday, exactly, day of rest. Right. But there's this question of what does that rhythm look like? And where can you step away? I mean, in creative process, it's really interesting. I mentioned IDEO earlier. They're a design architect firm from San Francisco, but they've worked on human-based design thinking, and they've moved that to a ton of nonprofit work too. That's just amazing. And one of the things they really talk about is how important it is to distance oneself from the project. At the same time that you have to then get in there and be engaged with it, it's okay to differentiate. It's kind of like systems thinking. Like at a certain point, you can't take all the responsibility for the system. You stop and look around, kind of catch your breath. I mean, these are the old story of Euclid, his inventiveness coming when he was in a bath, right? It's like, it's just when you go for a run, that's when the ideas come. It's just at a certain point, you have to move it off of the front burner to honor the vessel that's you. So then as you are, you can perceive what's next. And that's different than just not turning the TV on Sunday or whatever Sabbath meant in your home growing up.
So talk a little bit about that. How does a creative, an activist, or just a general Jesus follower, we'll let the Muslims have somebody else's book.
I just wanted to own the fact that there's a lot of Jesus.
That there's a lot of Jesus-y in there. That's good. That's good. No, nothing wrong with that. And these, this kind of sensibility. What are some steps people can take to start to generate or to stir up or to activate the creative process if they feel that that's been lost on them, or that it's been driven out of them, or they've thought that it kind of comes miraculously, like the muse just shows up and then it just kind of because there's a lot of artists who talk like that, right? There's this lore around creativity of the highly creative types where where it can be spoken of in this sensibility of when it visits you, it just visits you. And I hear musicians talk like this all the time. And then they'll describe the hard work that then goes into partnering with that sensibility. But what can happen for someone who either thought it was a mystical thing that was just going to happen and never really does, or they used to have it and they don't anymore?
Yeah. It's kind of like it's a writer's block kind of question. So some folks have made some comparison between the exercises and Drawn In with Julia Cameron's Artist's Way, and that was a really important book for me. One of the things she suggests, and it comes up as one of the exercises in here, is a daily rhythm, and she calls it morning pages. I think we called it something else because we couldn't call it that. But the gist is how in a regular basis do you get to a place where you can just flow, no need to leverage this and quickly get it onto Facebook or your blog. No need to turn it in. Is this going to turn into a sermon or a book? But just begin to have that free space to flow. My friend Todd Fadel, who's in Portland, songwriter, he does this project with songwriters this way, where they brainstorm a bunch of title names, and then everybody takes 5 minutes and writes something fresh in that moment. The lyrics aren't really a big deal. In fact, the whole song isn't a big deal, except for the fact that the playfulness is there. So someone will say, this time the drummer, I want you over here on bass, and he's like, I don't play bass. That's right, I want you on bass though, and I want piano. If you can just kind of hit these two notes, kind of. And a 3 against 4, and you begin to set it. And suddenly there's something playful that emerges. You laugh, you have some fun, you goof up, and then you stop. And each person has kind of a responsibility for that. So it's developing that agency of crafting something. Some of the other exercises that are in the book come from more contemplative monastic practices that I think are also really helpful, like the ancient practice of examen, where you consider the last day or the last 3 hours or the last week, and look for moments where you felt yourself enlivened, and look for moments where you felt numb, where you weren't really reactivating. And if you keep journaling that, you begin to go, geez, on a regular basis, whenever I'm going to be on Doug's radio show, I get really anxious for 3 hours and worry, is my hair right, or is my, so you go, okay, this is a pattern. It's showing up, and how instead do I acknowledge that pattern and move into another way of being? Another practice is Ignatian prayer, where you begin to go through your senses. And we do this in our worship gatherings. I think I've been to a porch gathering where you've done something like this. But where either with a text or just in the moment that you're in, you begin to pay attention to how you're breathing. You begin to pay attention to the colors and the light and to the sounds you hear. And what you're doing at that point is honoring the vessel that's your body in a way that allows your body to be open and receive again, instead of driving something into it.
So we live in a world that has tended to reward people for their function. The last 100 years, you in the industrial period, if you could produce something that was really important, and then information age kind of said if you can quantify and qualify and organize, it's important. And now you're suggesting this kind of creative sensibility, but doesn't it feel to a lot of people that creativity is and kind of the creative process is like a luxury? It's what you do on the weekend. It's sort of what you do if you have time and you've taken care of all of your other responsibilities. It's a hobby like that.
Yeah, I mean, or even more so, it's there's experts and then there's amateurs, and you only get to be an amateur creative until you either leverage everything for that. Are you there still?
Yep.
Okay. Or leverage everything for that to make that now your career. So now I can finally dream and create. And yeah, I think that is a challenge.
So can you tell people, like, is it legitimate to spend your time in creative endeavors and creative processes? And because it sounds indulgent, right? A lot of people, like they hear this kind of thing, like, listen to yourself and pay attention and honor that place where you find yourself. And that just can seem very, to the get it done types in our world, who get rewarded highly for that kind of thing. Can seem like they're all being successful, and these sort of hippiest creators are sitting around, never do like, what do you do, right? I mean, that's
contemplating the tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think there's kind of two takes on that. One is recognizing that you already are making those creative choices, and picking them intentionally. I mean, in a strange way, like when you're downloading apps, or you're choosing what movie you're watching, or you're choosing which way you drive somewhere, you're making these choices. The question is, how are they connected to one another? The things that give you life, like the people that you're a part of. How are they connected to memories that, like, how many times are your memories driving these decisions unconsciously, and can you bring those memories up and go, oh yeah, I guess I am doing that because of what happened in 5th grade, and that's okay, but now I know that. And so how am I connecting to that, and how does it connect to some of our dreams and our future? Like, in a lot of ways, I mean, for me, I can become frenetic about certain things. I mean, right now we're in this we're in the middle of a 3-day promotion for the book. So a little commercial break, right? The $7, you can get a copy of this book from Paraclete Press on Amazon. For Kindle, it's $3. Well, I've been firing stuff out to folks in Facebook and emails and Twitter for a couple of weeks, saying, "Hey, can you help me get the word out about this?" And so the challenge there is that in your work, can you connect this to something that is sacred? I'll use the language of the hovering as kind of put a halo on it. It's a very interesting thing to put a halo over even that practice. I was with somebody talking about it, and it was like, how do you work to sell your book? And this guy's response was, well, if it was sacred, you wouldn't have to sell it. And Kelly was next to me, and she was like, not if you're married.
Yeah.
Like, of course you still have to think about this. A painter has to go, am I ever going to be able to sell this painting? Those type of works can seem to be mundane. And so if you're an accountant, if you're a subway operator, you tend to think, oh, this work is just automatic, and somebody else gets the luxury of having fun with their work. And I think there is a way where our work connects to who we are. And it allows us to draw limits that are generous. Like the limits aren't, I just need more of my me time. It's really more like, in order for Troy to function, these are the places I'm going to go play. These are the times I'm going to look at a blank page with a pencil and laugh. These are the times I'm going to sit down with my 2-year-old and make jokes about potty training, because that's what we do right now.
All right,
instead of being like,
you do caution against the notion of, I think you actually use the word hoarding. Do you use that word, or did I put that word on what you were saying? And I really appreciated what you say, because I'm somebody who likes to work and work and work and write lots of poems, and then I just keep them to myself. And it's been an effort to let myself find places for them to be out in the world, or act on opportunities that other people offer for them to be in the world. And I think sometimes some artists feel like there's a hubris to that, as though, who am I to think that the world needs this thing? But part of what you're saying, or part of what I hear you saying, is that, well, if it's there and the world maybe can use it, it's good. It's good to let it find a place. It's good to put those Facebook notices up so that the people who might use and want your book can find it, can know it's there. And I always feel a real gratitude to artists who make the effort to put their work in the world when I can find it. It's just hard I think it's harder for the individual who's made something, or at least it's hard for me, to say, to have that courage to say, okay, maybe this is useful to the world beyond me, and I'm going to make space for it, or I'm going to put it somewhere, or let it be somewhere. And there's, but then if I don't, then maybe I'm hoarding. And so I think that's a part of what you're talking about, the other side of it.
That's one side of that's one facet of it, right? I know y'all talk a good bit about Enneagram stuff, and so in some ways, any advice on this is kind of like one person's poison is another's another potion. So the challenge here is that how does your work harmonize with the work of others? This is that reintegration piece that I think was such a helpful piece for me to discover as I was reading design sciences and going, this might be the most missional thing about the creative process. We often think when we use the word missional, we have to introduce something to the fray, but instead, what happens in the creative process is you go, will this ever be, what's the user experience? How does this integrate with people in their life? Does this harmonize well or resonate well with the work of others in my midst? And I mean, even like I saw Chihuly, the glassblower in Tacoma, and one of the questions they ask is, how do they display these pieces together? Like, they're busy cranking out these glass pieces, and then it's like, but how's it going to fit with the other pieces that are there? And so when we aren't filled with, for my own piece, I'm an Enneagram 7. My challenge sometimes is I get so passionate about something that it either has to be huge, or I'm going to jump to the next huge thing. So self-aggrandizement is a challenge there, right? I think if I'm going to introduce a poem to the blogosphere, or our friend Michael Toy does that, does a poets group. If I'm going to throw this out there, if I throw this out there, it better be good enough. And so in that sense, my own pride, my own need for self-validation is keeping me from understanding how it's going to work in the mix.
Well, Troy, thanks. So thanks for the book. It's called Drawn In, A Creative Process for Artists, Activists, and Jesus Followers. You should buy it the next couple of days. But not only the next couple of days, you should buy it lots of times. But in the next couple of days, there's some deals on the Kindle version, but also on the paper version. And they can find that at Amazon and at TroyBronsink.com.
Yeah.
Is that right, Troy? Yeah, great. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, buddy.
That is. Yeah. There.
Congratulations, and create on.
Thanks. You bet. Good to be with y'all.
All right.
And, thanks, Troy.
Look forward to talking more about it. You bet.
Thanks, buddy. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
See you, Victor. Cheers, Doug. Bye.
All right, we're going to be back here in a minute with Kyle B. Jones, our atheist. We're going to put together a little plan with Kyle where we're going to make craziness. We're going to invite people to have an atheist at church day. So stick around. We'll be back here on Doug Pagitt Radio after the break.